Welcome, everyone, to this next session of AI in construction. So in the last couple of sessions, we've talked about agents demystified. We've talked about creating agents and edge cases and all the fun that goes along with that. But as we start really seeing agents come into their own, and you're starting to see things like deep research, which people may not think of as an agent, but actually is, operator, and some others. And of course, in our industry, there are folks who are offering agents of varying types. So I wanted today to get into both what we're doing now, but also where we might see this go. So there's some frameworks towards the end. So basically, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time recapping because it's been about a month and I can't assume everybody shows up at everything. So talk a little bit about what we got into before, but I want to talk about three big things about working with agents. The first is prompting. Now, I know that sounds like it's old hat. Everybody knows how to prompt, but actually we're learning a lot more about how to prompt well. And the reality is, even with agents, you're going to want to ask them for things as, there are better and worse ways to do that. We're going to talk about tools and using resources and then agents as coworkers as kind of a broad category with four big frameworks I'd like to share with you. So along the way, as always, stop and ask for any questions. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. So let's get going. So in the past, we've talked a little bit about this. The word agents, everybody's making fun of the fact that it's getting thrown around a little loosely. At the end of the day, the thing that would define something as an agent versus a co-pilot versus something else is it's acting on behalf of you. So it's doing things when you're not there and you're not pushing the button, you're not asking. So you think about a chatbot, that's very much call and response. You think about even a co-pilot, very often that's the same thing. The difference, of course, is that in the case of a co-pilot, it's usually looking at other data. So when we think of that, look, this is me putting labels on things. The whole point here is these words get used quite loosely. Then you think about an agent, you're pointing it at a goal and you're telling it what outputs you want. Now, there are varying degrees to which this is true, but what's different here is it's adding reasoning. In fact, the new reasoning models are what have made this even possible, or certainly as good as they are now and getting better. RAG implies that you're able to give it knowledge and to-dos and various other things that help it achieve that goal. There are tools that are in there as well. And the final thing that's kind of new is the idea of test time compute. So it's actually spending a fair amount of effort and money, actually, thinking as opposed to just giving an answer. So definitely each of these three is kind of its own paradigm. And ultimately where we are with agents that gives you an idea. The other thing that I want to make sure we keep in mind when we think about any AI is this difference between what we call deterministic software. You press a button, it's going to do the thing. And if it doesn't do the thing, it's a bug. In contrast with AI, whether it's in an agent, a co-pilot, it's any other form, it very much is in giving you probabilities. Now, you might have heard of reinforcement learning, and that's actually incredibly useful in training the AI behind the scenes to prune away or filter the various options it might have thought to present to you, so that of the things that it regards as a high probability answer, you're giving it more and more guidance on what's the right answer. In fact, reinforcement learning is kind of what unlocked this entire conversation in 2022. That's one of the things that OpenAI got very good at with ChatGPT, and of course everyone else followed suit. But it's important to keep in mind whenever you're dealing with AI that anything you can do to limit the scope of probability is going to give you better answers but the whole point of it is it's also good at dealing with fuzzy inputs and giving it a goal instead of a fixed set of instructions. So the power of AI is it can handle a fuzzy world. The weakness is sometimes its outputs need to be kind of pruned and filtered and trained, which is a lot of what's going on with agents right now. So we're almost through the little recap here, but how to think about agents. The key thing here is that you want to get work done, not whether or not there's AI. And that matters because some things that are going to be sold alongside agents may not have that much AI in them. They may just be connecting things together to automate. And sometimes the AI might make that automation work a little better or work with, a wider range of inputs. But it's, what matters is the work you're getting done, not the technology. And that matters because it's just so much hype right now. Scalable, useful solutions. They need to be reliable and repeatable. I know that sounds like I've said the same thing twice, But making things reliable and repeatable means a lot of evaluation, a lot of hard work, a lot more than I think people maybe appreciate until recently. And AI is not best at repeatability; it's best at handling ambiguity. So, at the end of the day, what you hear people that work in AI say this: wherever possible, don't use AI. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be using it a lot, but it means if you've got a product, or sorry, if you've got a function or a need or a thing you need done, and you can just do it by connecting a couple of software together or whatever it is, don't introduce the variability of AI if you don't need to. If you have really good inputs, really structured inputs, you may not need to use AI. You may just want to use a standard automation. And again, those are getting a lot more sophisticated than they were before, and certainly a lot more user friendly. And we talked about that about a month ago. So the key thing here is absolutely I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think there was an enormous amount of power in agents, but we have to be careful about, are we able to, whether it's the agent itself, the tool that the agent is using, or steps in the process the agent follows, can we remove the variability of AI and still get done what we want to get done, or do we need to put AI in there? Again, both instances are going to happen a lot. That related to that is a general point I just want to keep hammering home. We have a bad tendency of thinking AI can handle bigger problems than classic software can. That's sort of true, but really what's more true is it can handle more variable inputs. Whenever you're doing something with, again, this is really true about software, it's true about personal problem solving, anything you can do to make the problem smaller, give it better data, give it better input, give it better specificity and focus. This all makes it more likely to be reliable because you've given it guardrails and you've given it much more focus. This is actually, again, like any other software debugging to get to reliability. And we joke that there's an old joke, I think I may have even said it last time. 90% of creating software is in building, and the other 90% is in debugging. And that's a kind of a wry joke because it always takes longer than you think it's going to. And I can personally attest how much fun debugging is. But at the end of the day, with an agent or a copilot or whatever it is, you're still talking about software that's expected to perform. And that means a great demo might distract you from how much work is ahead of you to make it reliable. So just keep that in mind as you talk about agents. The final kind of thing here is the more specialized agents allow. So that's kind of making the problem smaller to specialize them. And then, test it like crazy. I'm going to jump into the rest of this. So hopefully that helped, a little bit of a recap, giving you some level set here. So when we think about working with agents, I want to start with prompting it, and I'm going to actually show you how to use an agent that you may be hearing a lot about, and we're definitely going to talk about it in the future. And that's this idea of a vibe coding agent. So if you haven't heard the term vibe coding, it was actually coined by Andrej Karpathy, one of the kind of OGs of generative AI. He's talking about tools like this product called Replit, where you can go into it and with just a prompt, it will write code and actually create an entire deployable product for you. Great illustration of our point here, in that if you give it a couple of sentences, you're going to get gobbledygook that isn't useful. It needs a lot more thought. So this is, I wanted to throw this in here, the old Lewis Carroll quote you may have heard of: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That matters here, because if I'm not being specific about what I want and some of how I need to get there, you're going to wind up with something you didn't expect, and it's going to burn a lot of your time. So this is one of the themes you're also going to be hearing from me, is AI doesn't mean you don't need to think. It just means you get to think like a manager and think like an editor, and not think like, an individual contributor or a writer. So most agents are still going to require you specify what you want and really specify it. The more detailed, the more likely you get a good result. The cool thing here is, this is another thing that hopefully we're all learning to do more of, is you can have AI help you to use AI. That sounds really meta, but you're going to find, and hopefully a lot of you are, that you can just jump into one of the chatbots and say, here's what I want to get done. Help me to write a prompt for it. And I'm going to show you what we do in a second. But the first thing in going through that process, so I'm going to get a little kind of pedantic almost about how to do what I'm talking about. Now, this is going to be useful. I'm going to do it for Replit, and you'll see in a moment I've got a live session. In fact, just for giggles, let me pop over to that. So this is what Replit looks like. And for those of us who are not developers, this looks super intimidating. But at the end of the day, all you're doing is messaging it here. Now, I've already done some of this and I'll walk you through what I did. I purposely stopped at this step, but basically I wrote into Grok because I chose to use a new one here. So I actually had it, I prompted it and said, oh, you can't see it, I'll show you it later. I prompted it and said, can you help me write a good prompt for this product that I want to write or that I want to create? It went and did that, and that's what this is. So then I cut and pasted this and put it into Replit, and it got as far as this. So again, I'm going to come back to this in a second, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like. And the fact that I can use what is actually kind of an IDE, an independent development environment without code is pretty amazing. And behind the scenes, it's writing all the code for me. So we'll see more of that in just a sec. So let's say I'm in Replit. It's not very expensive. It's the other thing is like 25 bucks or something to get, pretty good stuff done. And actually, a point for later, they charge by buckets of tokens. So the more work you do, the more you pay, but it isn't like every single time you do something, it's you get to do a certain amount and then you have to buy some more. So that's important for a later part of our conversation. So I went and got that done. And the way to think about that is, how do I do that? Well, let's think about your general output. So you give the agent a persona and criteria. This is what I've heard over and over again, and it's really worked for me. You say, this is coming from someone who's the best in the world at this. You've built a lot of the thing I'm asking you to build. You've got a high IQ. As stupid as that sounds, it winds up really mattering. Give the agent the specifics of the project. So what are you trying to get done? It's for novices, make it clean and simple. Include whatever details you need to be a certain way. So an input field. So anyway, got into some of the details and so on. What winds up happening is you then go and create your prompt. So you get an LLM to write it. All of them will do this. Again, I wanted to try Grok. I actually kind of like it. Gemini is amazing. Obviously, I talk about ChatGPT all day long. Claude is great too. They're all just really high quality at this point. So this is what I put in. I need you to write a prompt for Replit, a to-do list app, including the following. You're a genius. This is stuff you've seen already. Create a to-do list app. It's for novices. Make the UI clean and simple. Be sure to include these details. And this is really if you already know what you want. There's another step I'm not going to do here. If you are creating a product, you might do a thing called a product requirements document, a PRD. The AI will know what that means, and it'll blow it out, and it'll really impress you with the detail and then you can go in and say, I like this, I don't like that. I didn't do that for this. And what came out is this prompt, and actually it goes down to like a whole other page. I just didn't want to go nuts with it. So it really created a highly detailed prompt, which I've got other things to do in my life. So it really is great. I then went and reviewed it. So that's the thing is you want to include, it's got everything you need and didn't add anything because you kind of are asking it to be creative here. And like, I think I added a task, but I didn't tell it to put in a task list display and clear completed tasks option. It added all of that. And I like it. It's great, but I want to make sure it didn't add anything weird you want to maintain your level of control over this. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with stuff you don't like. You've just wasted a bunch of time and some money. Automatic doesn't mean you get to avoid thinking. So that's going to be, again, a theme I'm just going to keep hammering home because we're already starting to see people are using AI to do too much of their thinking. You want to stay the manager, you want to stay the editor. And look at it that way. So step 4 is you prompt the agent. That's what I just showed you. So, a lot of agents are going to ask you to review the plan. You review, you adjust, approve. Now it does its work. You do something. The cool thing is you can have it do something else. So I'm going to pop back over here. So here it added some ideas. Add task categories. That's a good idea. Add ability to edit existing tasks. Not a bad idea. Local storage for today, I don't care about. Dark light mode, I don't care about. So I'm going to approve the plan. And now's the fun part. It's going to start. Got to resume it because it waited for me. So it's going to be thinking. And then over here, if I feel like being amused, I can see it coding. Right now, it's just kind of starting again. But as I'll go away, so you said agents thinking. So it's looking at how I prompted it. It's looking at what we've just selected, and it's going to get started. So I don't want to wait for that. We'll come back to it. You go do something else for a while. Sometimes that's going to be 5 minutes. Sometimes it's going to be 30. In fact, one of the points we'll get to later is how long they will run on their own. Still, it's still measured usually in minutes. They're just not that sophisticated yet. So the final part is review and then work with the agent. So the point here is depending on what you're doing, you might need to continue developing. So for those of you who maybe have used deep research. If you haven't, I strongly suggest not only you do it, but you take some of the guidance I gave earlier about really try to give it a more detailed prompt and try to tell it that things like, I don't need a long background, because what it often will do is give you, 2 pages of background that it's like, yeah, I know this. So you can tell it, go straight to the point, be brutally honest, be direct. You got 180 IQ, you're a good dancer, whatever it is you want to do to make it give you much higher quality than it would if you just ask it with 2 or 3 sentences. So anyway, once you've done that, this is where the debugging comes in. This is where you can try running it. It very often will have little failures. All you have to do is say that didn't work. It'll go back and think. So you're going back as if you're talking to a developer and saying, hey, that didn't work. Can you fix it? Very often it's going to get something good. I've so far, as it was more a test of my patience than its capability. What's interesting here is when you've done this, apparently the third thing didn't make it. Where debugging comes, it can be tedious, but you've done some things. First is you've expanded your capability to do things you couldn't have done before. Whether it's developing, if you are a developer, this can do things that maybe you don't know how to do. Or the second bullet is it's expanded your bandwidth because the AI agent is working while you're doing other things. You can have 5 of these going at once and it won't matter. In the case of deep research, which again I use quite frequently, you get it going, you can come back to it a half an hour later. You can come back to it 3 hours later and then say, hey, can you dig into this more? Can you dig into that more? Can you tell me more about this? So it's worth noting that you're not barking orders and expecting perfection back. You're giving it the best you can. As it does things, you learn and adjust and say, actually, I want it to be more like this or more like that. So let's pop over and look and see where it's gotten us to. It's still thinking. All right, we're not going to worry about that right now. So not exactly the best demo in the world, but I encourage you guys to check out Replit and just know that it's going to go to sleep, and waking it up, it's going to take a little more work than I want to do right here. So as I mentioned, what I just talked about, where you do your best to define what you want, you pop that best definition, including some of the kind of amp it up idea or exhortations about IQ and so on, pop that into a chatbot, and what comes out of it then you can use for deep research. Operator is what my OpenAI has. It's still a little limited, but it's getting there. Claude has something similar called web use or computer use, excuse me. But also no-code software like Replit. Lovable is one that's really good for websites. Bolt, I believe, is true too. Bubble is another one. And you're going to hear more and more agents coming out. And for all the fact that something that is purpose-built for construction, they've probably done some of the the testing and the prompting and all that to be a little less necessary for something too long. You're still going to get better results when you think about how can I work with this and give it the best prompt that I can. So again, think about your goal, define your requirements, get help from the chatbots, then expect to edit and revise. So a lot of this might sound obvious, but the behavior I often see with people is they just give it one thing and then they pass it on to the next person or they move on. It's really worth the investment, both of your attention, but also of your time to really dig into it. And I'm kind of point I'm making here is prompting isn't going away just because you have agents. Even for fine-tuned models and agents that they might drive, you're still going to want to make sure it knows what you want. You're still going to want it to know if there's any constraints or any resources you'd like it to use. It might be that there are tools that you've connected. So better prompts are going to get you to this next level of results, just way better outputs. Again, I think if you're using open kind of general purpose agents, this is going to be especially true. But as I say, when you see things that are purpose built for the industry, still true. You just might want to work with the provider to see how to make the best prompts. And again, third time I'm saying this, but AI augments what you do. Don't let it make you lazy any more than hiring somebody, means that you're not on the hook for the results. Really, you're hiring AI. You're not using software. And think of it in those words, in that way. Force yourself to spend the time giving it good inputs. You have a lot of help from AI to help you with AI. You still have to think about it. You're still responsible for what comes out. Think about how you might change your process or your view of the role of AI to avoid the trap of mental laziness. I don't mean to accuse anyone of anything. I'm just seeing this over and over again, and I'm guilty of it myself. In fact, one of the things that you might look at in your process is require that it give you short outputs. Because in the case of deep research, when you get 12 pages of an output, it's wonderful, but that's a big time commitment to really look at that. So you might say, for now, give me an executive summary so you can at least understand if it's directionally right, then choose to dig in or not. So you might think about how am I allowing for the fact that I've only got so much time, I've only got so much brain power, and there's only so much coffee in that pot. How do I allow for that and still make best use of these tools? This is a big problem that we all need to think about, both on a personal level. That's a good place to start, to be honest. But then, of course, as you see people that you work with using it, you're going to start to see, if you haven't already, things that are very obviously written by AI, and that's not a problem. You just want to make sure that both you and the people who are providing this input to you are thinking about it and not just dropping a question in and passing it off. Because again, I'm seeing that too. So that was the first of my kind of three big bullets. And of the three, that's probably the most useful right now. It's just a simple set of steps that'll help you to get the most out of these agents as they become more and more useful, but also so that you can find use in them and use them in your day to day. As I say, I use OpenAI's, actually not just them. I use all the deep researches. So Google Gemini has one. Claude has something, I believe. I definitely know that Grok does as well. In fact, I used Replit to create a little app that allows me to prompt it for something I want deep research on, and then it turns it into an MP3 so I can listen to it while I'm walking my dog, which is amazing. So it means every morning, if I think of it, it takes about 10 minutes, end to end. If I think of it, and then of course I just pop it into iTunes and I've got my briefing. So every morning I get 10 to 20 minutes about a topic I might be interested in, which I think is fun, especially if you're getting a little bored of reading of the news. So the next thing I want to talk about is agent resources. So you've probably heard about tools, tool use. That's one of the things ChatGPT is doing a really good job of, is building out tools, but frankly, everybody is. You're going to find really three cases. Some agents have all their tools internally, and a lot of the openly available stuff is like that. Things like Replit, Lovable. Some of the agents are going to use publicly available tools that you don't really have to worry about. So deep research is an example. The whole point of Operator and computer use is they're out on the internet doing stuff for you. But what you're going to find, both now and especially in the future, is various ways where agents can use specialized tools. There's a company out there called Crew AI. There's another one called Sierra. They're creating frameworks where multiple agents can work with each other and actually use each other as tools, but also they can use different resources as tools as well. And Model Context Protocol, or MCP, some of you may have even seen me posting about it. It's a new thing. We're not going to get to today. I'll just give you a quick intro into this. We're going to do a whole session on that in a month, which I'll get to in a sec. So what matters here, and when we think about tools, what I'd like you to just be aware of, because the first question everybody asks is, can I just plug it into an API? And the answer is, of course you can. In fact, that's one of the first things that OpenAI's assistance framework did last year. I think it was, or maybe it was even 2023. But the thing is, agents, they're going to have to be using a broad range of tools and using the tool well, using the tool in kind of an AI native way. APIs aren't AI native, they're cloud native. So the way they work, of course, is the call and response. I ask for a thing, it's going to give me a thing. It has no memory of what I asked for before, unless you've given it that. Usually they don't. It asks fixed input, fixed output, code plus a payload, a narrow set of instructions, and it tells you the things it can do in its documentation. What an agent requires, and that requires a strong word, what an agent will do best with is a conversation, an iteration to say, I need this. Okay, then how about this? Then how about this? So being able to actually operate with the tool as opposed to getting a very structured one-off call and response, having memory is really important. And that's what MCP is helping with. And there's some other things doing this as well. Templates for best inputs. So telling it, how am I best going to work? Now, that's not so different from an API. What is kind of cool is MCP definitely gives you the ability to give a user of your product templates for prompts so that when you give them something, they're going to be better at using it. I really love that. And that's really smart. Broader, flexible set of interactions as well, kind of like I was saying with iterations, but it allows you to do more things. It's also really good at telling the agent that's using whatever's on the other side of an MCP, telling it what it can do. a little bit more than the documentation of an API does, and certainly more in line. You don't have to go look for it somewhere else. So MCP now I've talked about for a little bit. What's cool is literally just yesterday, OpenAI, I was hoping they would do this, decided to adopt this. So Anthropic came up with it in November. They published it in November of last year. It's an AI native enhancement of APIs. It's not the only way to do this. It's just turning out to be such a good idea, even though it's still a work in progress. It does so much good stuff. It supports these two-way exchanges. It supports prompt templates, supports a listing of functions and uses. Again, on April 24th, and almost exactly a month, we're going to go deep into MCP and how it works and some ways that might actually matter for you, even if you're not a developer. And we'll get into some thoughts on that even today. So why would that matter? And why does this use of tools matter for us as we're thinking about the industry, both at a personal, what do I get to do today level, but also in a broader sense? Well, we've had the paradigm of how software works change before. So some of you may remember that most software, you got a disk, you popped it into your computer, and you had an on-premise version of it or an on-computer version of it. You paid for the license once. It was a lot more expensive, so I never used any Adobe product until they moved to SaaS because it went from $200 to $9 a month. When you unbundled that into continuously improved, it actually made the software better. When they unbundled payment as smaller increments, people like me suddenly would use things we don't need that much, but $10 a month, I can handle it. Even if they ultimately wind up making a lot more money, because instead of getting $200 from me once, on the 21st month at $10 a month, they're making more money than they would have. And people wind up being quite sticky. Another unbundling that's just an example of this idea of unbundling is AWS went from the way people used to think about providing cloud services, which is you kind of rent a server or memory or various other things, to per SIP pricing, which they don't use everywhere, but they've offered it in a bunch of different ways. Again, unlocking much higher revenues because people can use it a lot more easily. The barrier to using it is so much lower. I don't need to, pay $100 up front or $50 up front. I can use it a little when I need it, and as I use it more, my use grows, and I ultimately wind up spending more. So the question is, are agents going to lead to that again? One of the reasons I think they will is, I quote again, Satya Nadella about a month or two ago said, business applications are business logic on top of a database, and agents are going to replace the business logic, which means to me that the way we're serving and architecting software is going to change. I think it's important to remember that doesn't mean everything changes, and it doesn't mean that anything changes that fast. It's more like the journey we're on, and as more and more people discover that it'd be great if I had an agent for this because it can be much more personalized to what I need. And I think that's the big one, is the personalization. So I think you'll start to see this happen. And as we'll see a little later, some people it will be easier to change and others not so easy. But this idea of how that might work. So imagine the unbundled model, and I'm talking about our product here, where they can ingest and transform spec books, parse and classify content into a database, can analyze it. One way to do is submit a log, another way to do a closeout log. There's some other things we do. Then there's a user interface. We also have to include user management. We include security, we include integrations. I purposely made these italics because that's not something anyone else is really going to have any use for. Our security is so specific to our product and our implementation, integration similarly, and user management similarly. However, you might find that the first could be exposed as services on their own. I've heard people come to us and say, hey, if I gave you a big spec book, could you break it into pieces for me? Like, that's not a huge business for us, but still, wouldn't it be cool if someone could come and just do that? Like, hey, I've got a problem. I'll go to the link real quick. I'm just going to pop this in and get out the spec sections that I want. Maybe they just need, as I say, maybe they just need the documents transformed. Maybe they just need separated into spec sections. Maybe they need division 1 owner's requirements, extracts one of those analyses I talked about. Maybe they need 10 spec books analyzed and concrete inspection requirements compared and summarized. So the point is, rather than necessarily buying everything we do, maybe someone says, look, we'll do an arrangement with you where we've got X number of tokens and we're going to use them as we need them. You're still going to need a lot of the kind of upfront of who are you and what are our terms, but a lot of that we've already covered with end user license agreements that you can click and accept, as opposed to necessarily a really big MSA and SOWs and all that. So who knows if this will happen? I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think it was highly likely that this will happen for some people. I think that's what agents offer is the ability to have, rather than two or three relationships, maybe whether it's a contractor or you name it, might actually have like 10 or 15, but they're all much, not quite so much money, but that those same people are able to offer to a much broader group of people. So I think there's an interesting journey here. I don't have it all the way figured out. So much as to say, I think that tool use implies that software that was a monolith can be maybe broken apart and you're selling access to pieces of it as a second business model and maybe a replacement business model down the road. The obvious problem with that is in the beginning, you don't make as much money. And every unbundling led to that. Every unbundling had a transition period when, you're instead of getting $100 at a time, you're getting $10 at a time. So suddenly your coverage and various other things have to change. So it's not without it, nothing. So as I mentioned here, what that might look like actions or functions cost a number of tokens. As I say, that's how Replic's doing it. That's how most of the vibe coding products are doing it. Creating accounts, you're given budgeted tokens. What's interesting here is agents are given a budget. So you can tell this again, not happening yet, but this is the way you would imagine this would work, is you say, go solve this problem for me. You have a budget of X. And the agent or an agent, kind of a manager agent over them would estimate token budgets across tools and tasks to say, great, I think I can get that thing done with 1,500 tokens. It'll cost $10. That's the kind of thing an AI ought to be really good at. And you can see how, again, we're using AI to do things that a human might do and both augment what the human can do, but also increase the complexity that we can handle, which I think is really exciting. Having to actually think about the budget every time you did a thing, every time a task was given to, a junior staff member, for example, is there a way you'd ever do that, right? You just never get anything done. But because you can automate that, suddenly you have a lot more control over your cost and a lot better way of understanding where you are. Because you wouldn't hire a human to do that, but you absolutely get an agent to do it. The other one, so shifting gears real quick, another really exciting opportunity, I think, and I'd like to hear people talk about this more, is agents are going to need expertise to get things done. Obviously, they're going to need tools and transformations and stuff software does, but the construction is so complicated and there are often knock-on effects that AI is not going to know about. So creating expertise that can be productized. Now, this isn't replacing a human. This is taking maybe it's 25% of their knowledge, even that's a high number, that can be put down into a document, right? And that's going to be stuff that AI could really handle. The stuff that you couldn't put on paper, I'm not sure an AI could handle, like the judgment and the connections between things and your general sense of the world. You can't put that into a database. What you can do is say, we often see these issues, look for them. We often, in the case of product details, so constructability, the best an AI is going to be able to do is point out issues to get you started, but a human's still going to need to look at it just because of the complexity of a real project. But wouldn't it be great if you got a head start, if you popped in all the details that you have and said, point out anything that you see, so you can get started on issues that it finds and then get into a review yourself. But the process of amending or dealing with constructability issues doesn't have to wait until you're done. It can get started because AI has gotten it started, and you can go you or the consultant you're using can then go do a deeper review. You could imagine product details, right? So whether this is from a building product manufacturer, probably is who it would be, things like installation, don't do this, don't do that, make sure it's not next to this, make sure it's not in a humid situation, whatever it might be. These are again, not going to replace what a senior product rep can do, because a lot of times they can really handle complexity. But there are often, small questions that it'd be great to know, is that true or is that not? I don't have to go look up the documents. Common issues with project manuals. Again, this is where an expert can help. Common scope gaps to look for. It's one of the things that I know often comes up. The point I'm making is AI is going to create the opportunity for expertise, especially folks that have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, to be codified and turned into something that agents can use. And I think that's going to be super exciting. So where are we now? Excuse me, where are we now? All of this is emerging. It's hard for existing SaaS models to change to an unbundled model. So some of them might not. The curve to revenue for an unbundled model is slower. but has the promise for a really steep takeoff once critical mass of people know what you do and are used to it. That also might be really change how we think about freemium. Um, Allowing so certain unbundled things might be free to get people to be aware of the rest of what you do. I think that this is where the freemium model, which has been around for a while, might find new life. So, folks, I've gone through two big things. One of them is really thinking about how to use AI. The second one was thinking about tools. The third, we're going to get a little bit more nerdy here, so bear with me. And of course, this is all recorded, and I've got some other resources here. But there's four kind of related frameworks that I think are going to help you as all of this changes, and it certainly has helped me to kind of make sense of it. So, there's in early days, it's increasing talk of AI as teammates. By the way, if you're not familiar with Ethan Mollick, he's a professor at Wharton, I believe it is. He just does some really good publishing. Follow him on LinkedIn. Excuse me. Follow him on LinkedIn for a start. Just really good stuff. And he is here talking about cybernetic teammate. This was a really nice article, actually. But the point is, he's just doing a lot of really good stuff. He's actually got a Substack, which has a subscription to it, but one useful thing. So anyway, the point is, we're not quite there yet with teammates, AI teammates, but it's emerging, and everyone expects that to evolve over the coming 18 months. So as you think about that, it's not going to be an all or nothing thing. It's going to be, in pieces. It's going to be some roles are better than others. Some implementations are better for some roles. So here are four ways of thinking about this. Stratified systems theory, otherwise known as Reckwit organization theory, really looks at how long you can leave somebody alone to deal with, to do their job. Innovator's dilemma. Some of you may have heard the term disruption. Obviously, this gets used a lot. It gets used a little loosely. There's a very specific thing that Clay Christensen, and I think I want to say 30 years ago, 25 years ago, came up with. Value curves are a good way of analyzing what might be disruption. The final one is a thing called a Wardley map. And that's a way of looking at the industry and about maturity. So all three of these guys, I'm just going to have like one or two slides on each. I encourage you to check them out. I think the stratified systems theory is more of a have it in the back of your mind, and the specifics of it aren't as important. Disruption's a good one. Value curves you can actually use yourself. And frankly, Wardley maps, I'd have an AI do it. Like, tell it what you're looking for and have it come up with the answer. So stratified systems theory came from a guy named Elliot Jacques, who incidentally came up with the term midlife crisis. He apparently was quite busy. One of the leading thinkers in the mid-century. Wasn't a great writer, which is why you don't hear about him as much, unlike Drucker, who was both a great writer and a good thinker. His point was employees develop over time into ever-increasing capacities for complexity and very often top out somewhere. And a way of thinking about that is how long they can work on their own. So they think about length of time that you're unsupervised as a proxy for how much complexity you can handle, because it's really hard to otherwise measure complexity. There's just too many things, no pun intended, that go into it. So thinking about how long you can leave them alone is a good way of thinking about it. I think that's a good way of thinking about agents also. Both the idea of how much complexity they can manage, but also the idea of how far you can let them go. Time is a little less relevant because they're so fast, but thinking about how many steps they can handle, thinking about how many tools they can use, think about the equivalent of a human who could handle the task you're giving it. So the key to managing people at their level is one of the things that comes out of this. The manager should be one level above, or you're going to have a difficulty. So if you've ever had a situation where you've got a boss who's basically at the same level you are, it can be super frustrating because they're not telling you anything you don't already know. Or conversely, if you've had someone really, really senior who was your manager, they very often struggle to deal with the direction that you needed. That's kind of true with AI. That's one of the reasons why the prompting is so important. But the reason this matters, forgive me for all the text, agents are increasingly being viewed by how long they can work. I just talked about that. It's still much shorter than a human. And that matters. Like, they're not there yet. The amount of steps you trust an AI with is less than even somebody straight out of school in most instances, where the way we measure humans usually is in days, weeks, and months. The equivalent complexity of AI can't handle it yet. So knowing that, if you look at them through the lens of capacity for complexity, it's going to help you to really right size where you use them now and say, look, I get it, this thing doesn't do everything they promise, but it does do these things, and I'm going to figure out how to use that so I can use my time and other people's time somewhere else. And it helps you to use them in real settings. The question is, what happens when the capacity for complexity outstrips human workers? What happens there? What if it's only some workers in it? So in other words, it's now the median. It's as good as half of your workers. Does that change who you would hire? Does that change how you think about your team? Does it change how you train your team? Does it change how you hire for new team members? I think all of that's really interesting. It's a little bit too specific for there to be a general answer. It's more like things to think about when you're looking at a real product in a real process with a real team. But what that does lead you to is the idea of disruption. So what Christensen talked about is the idea that in the beginning, the disruptive technology is not as good as what's already there, otherwise known as the incumbents. A quick aside, I worked in I actually was a leader of marketing of Sony Walkman when the iPod came out. That dates me a little bit. And basically it wasn't as good as Sony Walkman in 2002, I think it was. But it quickly became better, and there is no Walkman. I mean, the brand's still around, but it's nothing like it was. It basically killed the brand because as they got better and better, and they did pretty rapidly, they absolutely replaced what the Walkman could handle. So again, the point here is that when you think about agents, right now they're not as good as what's existing, but they're on a different foundation. They're a different technological basis, means that ultimately we expect them to improve way beyond the original technology, whether that's SaaS or whether that's, I hate to say it, a human. So the existing technology companies, the other part of this framework is people are often locked into doing things the way they do them now. And that's where the term disruption comes from. The reason why big companies often don't adopt the new thing, whatever the new thing is because they have so much money stuck in both how the money they've already spent to build what they have now, but also their sales team, their marketing team is optimized and is really good at selling what they have now. That was exactly Sony's problem, is they were the best in the world at marketing and selling personal audio devices. And of course, they used the Walkman brand. They weren't so good. They didn't want to stop that and stop that cash flow and say, you know what, we're going to totally change and do this new thing. That has happened over and over and over again. Everything from from hard disks to computers to chips to so on and so forth. So now it winds up happening is, as I say, it's really profitable and they're optimized for it. And switching to the new way of making money very often is not something they can do. So AI agents, as I mentioned, aren't as good as SaaS for most things yet. SaaS business model is very predictable, profitable, and frankly fundable. This is something VCs really like because you can say every customer is going to be roughly this, that your customer lifetime value. A little harder to do right now. It's unclear what that business model is going to be. Obviously, it's unproven. Although some of these folks out in Silicon Valley, like Replit and Lovable and so on, are making an awful lot of money, but also unpredictable. So we don't know if they're all going to be disrupted in a year. So for the fact that some of these companies have gone from like $0 to $10 million a year in a year is unheard of, but we don't know if they're disruptible themselves. But the promise of extreme personalization, workforce multiplication, getting more out of each person, other benefits are going to threaten SaaS platforms. It's early, but you're going to hear this. You're going to see this. Whether it happens in construction or happens elsewhere, you're already starting to see it. So that brings us to the next one is, how do I know if the thing that we do and the agent, how do we know it's better in areas that matter? There's another idea called the value curve. So some of you may be familiar with a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And actually there were a couple of papers that led to that, where value curves are talked about. Just a means of comparing a product offering as a strategic tool. So instead of saying, oh, it's good, it's bad, it's this or that, you look at the different factors. Now, I actually had another thing we'll talk about. I had OpenAI do this for me. So it's kind of simple. Proving my point, though, is you can get AI to do some of this stuff and then you can tweak it. I didn't, because I wanted to illustrate a point. But the point is, you list the activities that deliver customer value. And that could be stuff the customer doesn't see. That could be stuff like thinking or storage or whatever. Rank each product offering. Often it's 1 to 5. It's really up to you. Then explore how these multiple offerings compare, and is one better than another. So automation, obviously, SaaS or agents are better. Adaptability, also better. Proactive assistance, about the same. Personalization, right now, SaaS is better. I think that's actually not right, but okay. The point is, it's showing you on each of these, how is one different from the other? That's a great way of thinking about disruption and what might happen soon. But also, it gives you the ability, and you look at concrete uses in real products, how's it compare to SaaS, or for that matter, a human? Does the current value curve give you insight into how agents might disrupt current solutions? So that often happens that you can do this and say, hang on a minute. I think people are really going to care about automation and personalization. They're better. Does the current value curve give you insight of how to manage and deploy a given agent? So this is another cool one. Is it's not just who's going to win. It's, hey, I've got this thing. Let's do a little insight and understand what its strengths and weaknesses are and where I'm going to use it. What's it really good at? I'm going to make sure I do that and maybe not use it for the things it's not quite as good at. So it's really valuable. Like a lot of these, whether you go through the steps to do this formally or just think of it as a framework, it's valuable either way. I often think that doing the value curve, it's so easy to do. You're really just taking a piece of paper and charting some things. Now, the final one is the nerdiest by far of all four of these. The rest of them you learn in business school. This one, you might. Wardley maps are used in technology a lot to think about maturity. So everything we've talked about so far is about change, is about what's going on. How do you map that? So, and you can go in and have this done. The one I'm going to show you in a minute, I had done for me by the new ChatGPT's image generator. So the structure is the value chain is the vertical. So you're looking at the items that are required to fulfill user need. So this often is, again, some of it's consumer or user facing, some of it's not. In fact, arranged by the visibility to the end user. So that's another kind of variable you can include here. Things that are more visible to the user are positioned higher. So anyway, this is just how you can build the thing. Then you think about evolution, and it's another way of saying maturity of components, progressing from left to right through 4 stages. Now you can use these stages or not. The idea is, less mature and more mature. Now I like the idea of really new and unrefined. You could use this for some of the technology maturity. I'm blanking on the exact word for it. The technology maturity scale that people often use. I think that's got 6 or 7 levels. But the idea is saying there may be 5, 6, 7 things that go into an AI agent. How do they stack in terms of so you're breaking a product apart. It's a little like value chain, but here it's a little bit more about maturity. So you can think about what's going to happen as things mature. This helps you see the future a little bit, or at least guess at it. Here's an example of a Wardley map. I actually didn't have it do this for me because it took too long. But you can get them to do Wardley maps for you. You usually need more input than I was going to do. So it gives you an idea that there's Genesis, right? Build, buy, or outsource. So they're making this decision. They're saying if it's custom built very early, obviously almost by definition, they're going to do it themselves. If it's something that is at a product level, they can go and rent it, right? Or they can buy it. In the case of something that's really a commodity, they can just have someone else do it. So it's an interesting way of thinking about what goes into a product, what goes into an agent, not just in general, but also for what you need. Let's say you need to buy an agent that's going to help with document review, or an agent that's going to help with RFIs, whatever it is. This is a way of saying, I want to analyze it and look at where it is. And look, if this got better, would I approach it differently? If this got better, if the intelligent app got better, would I approach it differently? So all 4 of these are a way of thinking about agents as they mature and as we think about onboarding them and adopting them. You don't need to do all 4 of them. You don't need to do any of them, but they're here as resources and things I've found really valuable in the past. So why do they matter? I've talked about this a lot. This is actually a really good Medium post about it. Actually, toward data science is generally really amazing. But if you look for building AI strategies for business from a guy named John Adejo, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Adioho. I really liked it. It's a couple years old, but it doesn't matter. It's the framework and the way of thinking that matters. So again, thinking about how it's evolving compared to customer needs or your own, good evolution of disruption and value curves. So folks, that is it for today. I told you there'd be a lot in here. I want to tell you about some upcoming webinars. There's so much going on right now that I think, we're right now every 2 weeks we'll do one of these. A good friend of mine, Stephen Poppy, was talking to me about how he felt like he'd crossed the chasm. I love that he used that word, where he'd been using AI a little bit, but it started to become part of how he does his everyday work. And that started to impact how he thinks about his own team, who he might or might not hire, how he might or might not use people. I love that. So Steve and I are going to talk about that in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after that, I've been talking about how AI is possibly affecting people's development and their critical thinking. We're going to dive into that one as well. I think it's a big deal, to be honest, and it's good to get ahead of this stuff. As promised, in 6 weeks, we'll talk about model context protocol in a lot more detail and what it means and how to think about it and how to make it work for you. And then just because I couldn't help myself, we're going to go deep into vibe coding. We're going to go through Replit and some of these other frameworks. So hopefully you'll join some of those. Most of you have been invited, or you certainly can easily find it. It's all in my place. So with that, I'm going to answer. I'm actually going to say thank you all, and